Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'd like to welcome Professor Behe to the program. Thanks for joining us, Professor Behe, and I do appreciate the tremendous amount of patience you've had with the technical difficulties today.
Sure, no problem. My pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. All right, we'll go right into question number one here. Professor Behe, can you briefly explain when and why you first became involved with the intelligent design movement, as opposed to, you know, choosing the path of a more status quo Darwinian biochemist?
Yeah. Sure. Well, I started out as a status quo biochemist. I had a normal education, and I did research in my laboratory on DNA structure and protein structure. It wasn't until I was a tenured associate professor at Lehigh University that I became interested in evolution. I had believed the normal Darwinian idea, but at that time, it was the late 1980s, I read a book called Evolution, A Theory in Crisis by a man named Michael Denton, who's a geneticist and medical doctor who was working in Australia. And he raised a number of problems for Darwinian evolution that I had never heard of before. You know, here I was a faculty member at a good institution, and I had never known about such problems with Darwinism, and it made me curious, and I decided to go. And when you're a biochemist, you study intricate systems, molecular systems in the cell, and I had always wondered how such things might evolve. And after reading Denton's book, I decided to go to the library and see who had explained those systems. And it turned out, much to my surprise, nobody had. And at that point I got mad. I got angry because I had thought I was being led to believe something not because the evidence required it, but because of social factors. This is what you're supposed to believe now. And so at that point I was knocked off the normal road and became much more skeptical of Darwinism and started down the path to intelligent design.
Oh, great, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see. It's been about 18 years since you first presented the concept of irreducible complexity. That was in your book, Darwin's Black Box, I believe. And I'm wondering if you feel that it stood up to the criticism. Do you feel that IC is as relevant in 2014 as it had been in 1996?
Yes, I do. I think the concept has stood up very well. As a matter of fact, when I first published the book, Darwin's Black Box, I was expecting maybe a scientist or group of scientists to say, you know, well, haven't you read these group of papers that explains the problems you're pointing out? But that never happened, and it's been 18 years now, and it still hasn't happened. There's been a lot of people replying, a lot of people saying, look at this or consider this argument, but none of those, and I consider them very carefully, none of those addresses the point. Some of them, you know, misinterpret what's meant by irreducible complexity. Some of them point to experiments that actually show the problem more than they do the solution to irreducible complexity. The long and the short is that there haven't been any that show how Darwinian processes could get around the problem of needing a number of different components at the same time to produce an effect, and how that might be built up gradually. So I'm very pleased with it. As a matter of fact, if anything, more modern work has shown that even things that are mildly complex are very big problems for Darwinism. But maybe I'll talk about that in response to another question.
Great, I appreciate it, and I agree with you. I'm constantly online as a strong intelligent design proponent, and irreducible complexity being refuted comes up a lot, and I don't see any evidence that it has been. So I agree. Thank you. We are very familiar with a lot of the media hype that surrounded the Dover testimony that you gave, specifically in regard to the blown-up assertion that you supposedly believe astrology should be a legitimate scientific theory. And yeah, believe it or not, this is actually a topic that comes up every day, still to this day. People claim that you made that claim, and I never actually saw that you did. So can you give us a brief explanation of that?
Sure. I was asked during my interview with the lawyer for the plaintiffs in the trial, you know, do you think astrology could be considered a science? And I was answering in a history of science from a history of science point of view. You know, when it was first proposed, you know, could it have turned out to be a real explanation? And it turns out in the Middle Ages, you know, it was in fact considered a legitimate scientific point, or science wasn't really around then, but it was a legitimate explanation. And if you think about it, you can see why. You know, if the moon can affect things on Earth, you know, like tides and so on, well, maybe other things can too. And if you don't know much about the universe, don't know much about nature, it's a legitimate hypothesis to make. Now, of course, now that we have made a whole lot more progress, we can see that it's not correct. But there are many ideas that have been thrown out in science that we now regard to be wrong, but we're worth investigating. We're in fact thought to be potentially correct. You know, the phlogiston theory of oxygen and the phrenology, the bumps on heads that might affect intelligence. Those were scientific theories, and so I just wanted to show the court that science is not just what turns out to be correct. It's some things that are incorrect and some things that strike us as strange these days too.
Okay, great. That's pretty much what I got out of it, and remind people of that when they bring it up, but a lot of the opposition just doesn't want to hear it. They don't want to see it. They'd rather believe that you're out there pushing astrology as science, and I didn't get that, and most intelligent people didn't get that either. Your testimony. So, okay, great. Let's see. You've made a few statements in the past. I'm skipping ahead here a little, but I'll get back to it. You made a few statements in the past supporting common descent. Can you give us a few brief thoughts regarding your current position on universal common descent?
Yeah. Okay. Well, evolution has to explain two things: the similarities between organisms and the differences between organisms. You know, we have similarities with other animals, and we have lots of differences with other animals. Now, Darwin's idea of random mutation and natural selection is the proposed mechanism for explaining the differences. Common descent is the proposed explanation for the similarities. But if you think about the explanation of common descent, it essentially just says that two kinds of organisms, two kinds of animals, have similarities because an ancestor in the past had them. It does not explain where those features came from. It just said an ancestor in the past had them. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, that's possible. You know, maybe that's the case. The big problem for evolution has not been to explain, you know, how things that were there stayed there. It's the problem is how to explain how new, complex, sophisticated biological machinery developed. So I think the idea of common descent is a reasonable hypothesis, but I do not think that new organisms, new sophisticated biological features could develop by random mutation and natural selection. So that common descent, I think common descent is true, but I don't think it's a Darwinian process. It must be guided, that an intelligent agent must have essentially planned the unfolding of life. And there are problems with that view, and there's problems with the data on common descent. Things sometimes don't line up the way you expect them to. But overall, I still think it's a reasonable hypothesis.
Okay, great. Thank you. And getting back to a question that I think is a little bit more relevant now than I had placed it as the fourth question. Can you give us a few of your brief thoughts regarding the more current phase 2 results of the ENCODE project and junk DNA in general?
Yeah, it's interesting. The idea of junk DNA was floated, I think, first because humans seem to acquire a lot more mutations every generation than they would be able to sustain if all of their DNA was functional. It turns out that a new human, a new baby that's born, has about 100 more mutations in its DNA than its mom and dad have. And some geneticists have thought about this and said, well, if that were the case, then the human race would be degenerating, pretty quickly. So it must be, they thought, that maybe 99% of the DNA is just junk or is not functional, and only 1% is functional. And so that means that only one of those 100 mutations is likely to affect a functional part of the DNA. But all of this was kind of theoretical, just on the mutation rate, not on any experiments or anything. Well, as you know, some other groups of scientists have done experiments where they asked the question, what fraction of DNA in a human is active or expressed or copied or shows signs of activity. And it turns out in the latest work in that area, not 1%, but 80% or so of the DNA seems to be active. And so that kind of blows the explanation for the mutation rate out of the water. And it's interesting because this idea of junk DNA had become a Darwinian selling point, that sort of a designer would make DNA that was 99% junk. Well, it turns out, it seems like it's not 99% junk. It's a lot more functional than anybody had supposed up until that point. And we've still got this problem of what's the mutation rate doing? What is how are we tolerating this very high mutation rate? The answer to that last question is I don't know. It seems like we've got more problems than we had thought before. But the interesting thing is that a far higher proportion of DNA seems to be functional than Darwinists had given credit for just a few years ago.
Okay, great, thank you. James Shapiro, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. He's gained some popularity with his NGE paradigm. Are you familiar with his work? And if so, can you give us a few of your own brief thoughts regarding natural genetic engineering?
Yeah, I have read his recent book about evolution in the 21st century, and it's very interesting. James Shapiro is not an intelligent design proponent. but he's not a Darwinist either. He doesn't think Darwinism can explain what we have discovered in the cell. He's a disciple or a student of Barbara McClintock, a Nobel Prize winner from earlier decades, who first showed that DNA could move around, at least elements of DNA could move around in a genome. And it turns out that the cell has machines that can rearrange DNA and modify DNA and do lots of tricks with it. And Dr. Shapiro thinks that genomes might evolve by what he calls natural genetic engineering. And that is just like scientists in the lab can rearrange pieces of DNA to make some biological effects. He thinks that maybe cells themselves can rearrange their own DNA to help them evolve. And I think it's a fascinating idea, and he certainly shows challenges that there are to Darwinian evolution, and it might be, in fact, true. It might have some merit to it. The only thing I would ask is, where did cells get these tools, these machines in the first place, that allow them to do natural genetic engineering? You know, they're in his writings, they're kind of the starting point. They're unexplained, but hey, then, you know, we're starting from a very sophisticated starting point. It's not something simple to have machines that can rearrange DNA. And the other question I would have for his idea is that, how do cells know how to rearrange DNA? And what would be a more effective use of the DNA? And I think that to the extent cells can do that, it must be because they're already programmed to know how to rearrange DNA. So, all in all, although Professor Shapiro is not an intelligent design proponent, I view his ideas as very friendly to intelligent design and kind of along the same tracks as some of our ideas. So it's one of the interesting things that are fermenting in biology these days.
Okay, great, thank you. Next to you and Stephen Meyer, James Shapiro is probably my third in line that I cite continuously. I enjoy his work, and he's done a lot of good stuff. Like you said, he's not an intelligent design proponent per se. But that segues me to my next question. I've personally cited your 2010 paper, The First Rule of Adaptive Evolution, many times. Can you comment briefly on how the results of that paper and the premise, how is it holding up in regard to newer research?
Oh, it's holding up wonderfully well. In that paper, I reviewed a number of laboratory evolution experiments, plus some results from the field on the evolution of various systems like malaria and the agent that causes malarial disease, and showed that most, or a large fraction, of the beneficial mutations were actually due to degradation of DNA. That is, breaking functional DNA that was already working. If one broke the right regions, that would help in some selective environments. For example, humans that live in regions of the world where there's a lot of malaria have accumulated mutations that help them survive. And most of those mutations are where a gene that is usually present in people gets broken, and that helps for some reason, helps to resist malaria.
Yes.
Well, in recent times, as a matter of fact, this year, a flurry of papers have come out that have been able to track down beneficial mutations, and they've shown that they are all degradatory mutations, ones where genes are broken. there was a story in the New York Times a few months ago about a gene, about a mutation that gives its people that have it resistance to diabetes. And it turns out the mutation is where a normal gene, a particular normal gene, is broken. And those people can metabolize sugar better than normal people. Another story in the New York Times talked about research that showed a group of people with a certain mutation that allowed them to resist heart attacks, to have fewer heart attacks. And again, this was a different gene that was broken. And another story showed that a group of horses, which are very popular among horse raisers, a mutation allows the horse to run, to have a gait that is smoother than wild horses, and so they're easier to ride. And that mutation was tracked down, and it was shown to be a particular gene that's expressed in nerve tissue, and it's broken. So we have a flurry of activity, and overwhelmingly it's seen that beneficial mutations turn out to be degradatory mutations. And if you think about it just a little bit, you see the problem for Darwinism. Darwinism has to explain how sophisticated molecular machinery was built up. And here it is, what we see it doing, what we see random mutation doing is tearing down pre-existing machinery. So that's not the type of a process that you would expect to be able to build up machinery. It's kind of like, you know, a process that might blow up your computer is interesting, but it's not the opposite of something that builds a computer. It doesn't tell us anything about how to build something functional.
Okay, great. And I believe you're probably familiar with the late Lynn Margulis, and her take on neo-Darwinism was pretty much the same, where she said she looked for the evidence of NS acting on RM as a creative force, and it just isn't there. It's never been there.
Yeah.
There's no evidence for it. So.
That's right, yeah.
Great. Let's see. Can we get a few of your thoughts regarding the work of Douglas Axe and Ann Gager, if you're familiar with their two papers dealing with the fixing of mutations in a population? Just some brief thoughts. Like, I guess they would be in line with your work from my point of view, as far as showing that there just isn't enough time with degradation happening and everything else. So just a few of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, they just calculated how long it would take to accumulate mutations in the population in order to, they were interested in order to see where new enzymes come from. And they calculated that, in fact, if you need, you know, a handful of mutations, 5 or 6 or so, then one would not expect that to happen in the entire history of life on Earth, even given the enormous number of bacteria that exist over billions of years. If you need 5 mutations in a gene to lead to a particular change in it, then you would not expect that to happen. It turns out that it turns out that that's just a much more difficult problem to address than people had given it credit for. And the problem is that they also then showed that, you know, if you start out with a particular protein, a particular enzyme, and want to change it into something that's really very similar to it, and they showed examples of these in their paper, you can't get even from these one closely related enzyme to another. So this really is intensifying the difficulties for Darwinism. And as you said, it seems to go pretty well with some stuff I've noticed too in the literature, that if you are in the study of malaria, the malarial parasite required 2 mutations in order to change a protein into a form that would resist the antibiotic chloroquine, the anti-malarial drug chloroquine. And it took an enormous number of organisms, 10 to the 20th, an astronomical number, in order to produce this mutant. And that had only 2 mutations. So what we're seeing is, when we're looking closely, is that the kind of breezy invocation of an accumulation of mutations that Darwinists have done forever is a lot more difficult. Than they had thought, and pretty much we would not expect those things to happen in the history of life.
Great, thank you. In your opinion, is the intelligent design paradigm still going strong within what I would call the underdog scientific community, or do you feel as if the Darwinian-minded press has successfully muddied the waters to the point of no return? And where exactly do you see the id movement being in about 5 years?
Well, I think there has been a lot of intimidation over the past years against people who would honestly evaluate the evidence and say that intelligent design is a reasonable, a good idea. I mean, especially since 2005, in the wake of the Dover trial, and a lot of publicity for intelligent design earlier in the year 2000s, people have been cracked down upon. People have been intimidated. Graduate students, faculty who favor intelligent design have been kind of persecuted. Some have been run out on rails. And so that makes it so that nobody in science can casually say in public that they think this intelligent design idea, is pretty good, has something going for it. Nonetheless, there are a lot of people who will say so in private, who agree that Darwinism is an idea whose time has come and gone, and that other unintelligent ideas for how life might be explained are not panning out, and that intelligent design does look like it's got a lot going for it. There are also younger scientists who are very interested in it, and who are working their way up through into the scientific community, and I expect them to be making a splash in these areas in the years to come. In 5 years, I expect a couple things. It's hard to know whether intelligent design would be openly accepted in a relatively short time frame like 5 years, but I do expect more and more young scientists to be increasing their training, getting jobs, and so on, who are open to the idea of intelligent design. And I also expect the more results, the more we know about biology, the more progress that biology is making, the more intense the problems will be for Darwinian theory, and the more strongly results will point to intelligent design. Now, that's always been the case. Intelligent design has prospered not because of anything I've done or anything folks in the intelligent design movement have done. It's the data that has driven the conclusion of intelligent design. The more we know about biology, the more sophisticated and elegant we find it to be, and that is the basis of the intelligent design hypothesis.
All right, great. I agree with you 100%. We're down to pretty much the end here, and I just wanted to say I've heard you lecture many times. I'm also a Pennsylvania homeboy. I'm about 40 minutes outside of Lehigh. I've met you a few times in the past, and was really looking forward to this interview, because I really admire your work, and hope you and the rest keep on going and don't give in. And we're with you there every day on Facebook and everywhere else, citing the work and citing the papers. So how about I just leave you with a moment for some final thoughts regarding either evolution or intelligent design, or religion, or any personal message you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I guess the only thing I'd like to say is that I got into science because I wanted to know how the world worked. I wanted to know what truly was going on in life and in the universe. And so the most unpersuasive comment that I hear repeated is that science can't consider intelligent design because it's philosophically off limits. But I think that's faint-hearted. We want to know, I want to know what the truth about life is, and if the data show strongly or indicate strongly intelligent design had a part in building up life, then that's where we should go, and that's certainly where I and many of our colleagues here are going. We're not going to be dissuaded simply because somebody's trying to artificially rule off an area, and that's what I thought science was all about. And I imagine that we'll get back on track. Science will get back on track at some point, but I myself will never be stopped from investigating something just because somebody said that you're not supposed to consider that. That's off limits.
All right, great. I appreciate it, and thanks for being with us tonight and dealing with some of the few technical difficulties we've had. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thanks very much.